There's a book that's called Respectable Sins, and it is a unique book. The idea of the book is there are certain sins that we don't treat like being sins anymore. I mean, like there's sins that we know are wrong, like we just all know are wrong. Like it's wrong to murder, it's wrong to steal, it's wrong to be violent, it's wrong to be a Rams fan. Like those are obvious, like we know those are sins, but we're talking about these little socially acceptable things, like pride, or judgment, or gossip, or worry. And there's another one that I think is relevant, and it is complaining. We don't think complaining is like that big of a deal. I mean, honestly, complaining is so unique because it's one of those things that we bond with other people over our complaining, right? You walk into a room of strangers, people you don't know, and you complain about one specific thing. You complain about traffic or the weather or politics or slow Wi-Fi or gas prices, or you complain about church, and guess what? You suddenly have some new best friends, right? You don't necessarily have to have any shared hobbies or values. You just have shared frustration, and all of a sudden, it's like this universal icebreaker where you're like connected. Complaining is one of those things that seems so harmless, but complaining is not just about what's wrong around us. Complaining is what we do when there's a problem and we don't want to fix the problem, or we can't fix the problem. Or it's what we do when we are arrogant and we see a problem and we're like, man, I could do so much better than that. Complaining, grumbling. I know some of us, like, complaining is our go-to. But for others of us, our go-to isn't complaining, or our go-to isn't just complaining, it's control. Any control freaks around? Nobody wants to raise their hand, right? Because when things feel risky or uncertain or we feel powerless, sometimes our response is we're going to plan harder. We're going to hold things tighter. And what happens is when we can control things, sometimes it leads us to hoarding. Control leads us to wanting to grab as much as we can, whether it be margin or security or money or time. And you hoard it because you don't know when you're going to need it, right? And this is where Costco comes in. You know what I'm talking about, right? Like I love Costco. Like where else can you buy a kayak, a $1.50 hot dog, and a year's supply of toilet paper in one place, right? So my wife and I, we went to Costco here a week or so ago, and we're walking down, and we saw this jar of pickles. I'm like, who needs a jar of pickles this big? I know some of you probably bought this, and you're like, oh, I have that in my fridge. I'm not judging you. I'm judging you, all right? I'm not going to trust myself to hold this with one hand because I'm going to drop it, right? Who needs a jar of pickles that big? But Costco has this idea that we just need to stock up, right? And it's almost trained us to have this subtle way of thinking that if we buy more, we will need less. Like if we stock up now, we won't have to worry later. Like somehow we can control the future by present accumulation. How many of you guys remember during COVID? Stocking up and hoarding the toilet paper, right? It was what we did. And listen, we don't just do this idea of hoarding with groceries. We do it with money and schedules and plans and backup plans for our backup plans. Some of you control freaks, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? And so the question that we have to ask is where does our grumbling and where does our lust for control, where does that come from? What do those things reveal about our hearts when we grumble and desire to control things? And I'm going to be bold here. Ultimately, I think both these things are trust issues. There are different ways that we respond when life begins to feel fragile and out of our control. Because when we grumble and complain, we're saying, God, I'm not sure you've got this. God, I'm not sure you're in control. God, I'm not sure you're good. I'm not sure you're looking after things for my good and for your glory. And control is when we throw up our hands and say, fine, God, I'll take over. I'll handle this. I can figure it out. And both these responses show an uncertainty when we're trying to manage our fear. Both answer that same question: can God really be trusted? So let me just say, welcome to Restoration Church. We are so glad you are here. We here at Restoration, we don't believe church is just a place to attend. We believe it is a family to belong to. And man, we'd love to have you join what God is doing here at Restoration. We started a series a couple weeks ago that we're calling Dependent, where we're trying to start this new year out by anchoring our hearts into the words that Jesus said in John 15. Jesus said, abide in me, because apart from me, you can do nothing. And ultimately, this is where we're trying to create a heart in us for 2026. This is our vision for 2026, that we would be a church marked by dependence on God, marked by prayer, that we might see this God-produced fruit within us, in our community, doing more than we could ever imagine. So, Exodus chapter 16 that Michelle read for us this morning is a great story. This happens a month after Israel has been saved from Egypt. Remember the story? They had been enslaved in Egypt for a long time, 450 years. And God miraculously rescues them. You know, the whole Red Sea splitting and Pharaoh and the army being defeated. And so Israel is now a month after that. They're in this process where they're going to the promised land. And they hit the struggle bus. I mean, sure, they're saved, but they're like, hey, we're unsettled. The supplies that we brought from Egypt, they're starting to run out. And they begin to grumble. They begin to clasp for control. They're asking themselves that question, can God really be trusted? Can he really take care of us? And really, I think this chapter answers a question that we need to wrestle with this morning. And that question is, what does God want to form in his people? What does God want to form in us when life feels uncertain? Right, because how many of us in this room would say, I've been through seasons where life feels uncertain. I don't know what the future holds. I don't see where it's going. I don't understand it. And if you've ever been there, you wonder these same feelings. God, have you forgotten us? God, where are you? God, are you absent? And maybe that's true, or maybe the question we should be asking is, God, what are you trying to teach us? Because as we wrestle through this idea of us being a church that is dependent on God, I think this is a lesson in daily dependence that God wants us to wrestle with as we learn what it looks like for us to be dependent on God. So we're going to see three lessons, three movements through this chapter on daily bread. Number one for us is saved people sometimes struggle with trust. It starts out verse 1. It says, all the congregation and the people of Israel, they set out from Elim and came to the wilderness of Sin. And there's no secret meaning for the word sin here. It just means they were in the region of Sinai. And it says, on the 15th day of the second month after they departed the land of Egypt, again, this is a month after their rescue. Verse 2, the whole congregation and the people of Israel, they grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And what is so striking to me is when this happens that they grumble. Because Exodus chapter 2, like this is just a few weeks before, Exodus chapter 2, it says that the people of Israel, they groaned to God because of the slavery, and they cried out to God for help. And God listened, and God showed up, and he did all the stuff, and he saved the people. And now, guess what? Now is when the grumbling starts again. And it's almost unbelievable what they say. Verse 3, they say, "Oh, that we had died by the hand of the Lord in Egypt when we sat by meat pots and ate bread till we were full. But you have brought us into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." You know, how many of us remember the good old days? The good old days. What is it about the good old days that we look back and we romanticize? All those good old days, right? Oh, those good old days when we had meat pots and all the meat we could want, and we had all the bread we could eat. And we forget about the whips, and we forget about the bricks, and we forget about the oppression, we forget about the slavery. Oh, but there was good bread, and there was good meat. The irony of this is they accuse God of bringing them into the wilderness to kill them. The same God that split the Red Sea, allowed them to walk through on dry ground, that defeated the strongest army in the world. Oh, he can do that, but he can't provide lunch for us. There's no way he can do that, right? See, this is probably the key thing we need to grasp, is grumbling isn't really about our circumstances. Because when we grumble and complain, it reveals what we are currently believing about God's character. Because God is the sovereign God, the Lord of all creation, the one who is working all things for our good and for his glory. And when we grumble, we are saying, "God, I'm not sure you're really good. God, I'm not sure you really love us. God, I'm not sure you're really looking out for us." Because their deliverance from Egypt, the people's freedom from slavery, it did not remove their dependence. It revealed their dependence, right? Because when they were in Egypt, they were dependent on Pharaoh. Pharaoh, you need to feed us. You need to take care of us. And now that they're free, now that God has delivered them, they're supposed to trust God and depend on God. But the question is, God, I'm not sure you can be trusted. We're still dependent. It just looks differently. Like I was trying to think about how to illustrate this, and I was thinking this way. My wife and I, we've got 5 kids. I know, yeah. We didn't have cable for a long time, but we've got 5 kids, and we're in this season where our kids are transitioning into adults. We've got kids that are graduating, becoming adults, and I got to be honest, this is a bit of a struggle for me. I'm not sure it's a struggle for them. I think they love it. But it's a struggle for me because for 18 years, these kids have been dependent on my wife and I. They're like, "We need you, Mom and Dad." And then all of a sudden, they're like, "Oh, we're young adults. We don't need you anymore. We got to go be our own." And there's a part of me that likes when they're dependent on me because it makes me feel good. It makes me feel all the feelings. But you see, what happens is as our kids are transitioning into adulthood, they're still dependent. They're still dependent. It's just a new kind of dependence. Where no longer are they dependent on Mom and Dad. Now they need to depend on the Lord. But sometimes what happens is parents or kids, we struggle letting go of that childhood dependence. We struggle letting go of it. Because this new freedom feels unstable. Well, what if? What if this happens? But isn't that what we want for our kids? Not to be adults depending on their parents, but to depend on the Lord? See, I think this is where Israel is. This freedom hasn't removed their dependence. It just revealed they're struggling to actually depend on the Lord. And what's crazy is here they are, they're complaining. "Oh, God, we're not sure you can be trusted. You brought us out here to kill us." After Israel complains, I want you to see how God responds, because he doesn't respond with judgment. He doesn't respond with silence. He doesn't say, "You're idiots." No, number 2, he's going to provide daily bread to teach them to form daily dependence on him. Verse 4, the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I'm about to rain bread from heaven for you. And the people shall go and gather a day's portion every day." And what I think is so cool about this, again, you got to read the story. Like they complain, and immediately after that, what does God do? Right? Before there's any rules, before there's repentance, before the people say, "God, we're sorry, we shouldn't have grumbled," what does God do? He rains down bread from heaven. This is like the original Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. It's just coming down out of the sky. It's remarkable. And notice, it wasn't like a month's worth of bread. It wasn't a week's worth of bread. It was daily bread. Daily bread. And I'm like, God, that seems impractical. Like that seems so, like God, there's going to be people that have anxiety because they're not sure if bread's going to come tomorrow. God, you could remove all the anxiety. God, if you just dropped a Costco in the middle of that desert, bread for day, like everybody would be set. But I want you to hear this, verse 4. He said, I'm going to provide rain from heaven for you that I may test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. See, this test, it wasn't about hunger. It wasn't about provision. It wasn't about bread. It was about trust. It was whether or not they would believe that God would provide again tomorrow. Because God's priority is not just convenience and survival. God's priority is formation. He's forming his people into a people that are supposed to be daily dependent on him, to come to him every day. In fact, I was thinking about it this way, as it was a way to illustrate this. Like, I don't know, like we all have our phones with the maps on it, right? And when you're driving, you put in the location. And the thing I hate about those maps on my phone, I want to see all the instructions. But the phone's like, nope, I'm going to give you one instruction. You drive on some of you, and when you get to 40th, you turn left. And I'm like, okay, what's after that? Nope. You wait. When I turn left on 40th, then it's going to say, okay, next you're going to turn right on Deyette, right? It's step by step. This is how God is leading his people. Because daily bread is about this trust and dependence. Where God says, I'm not going to give you the whole map. I'm just going to give you the next step, turn by turn. I'm going to give you just enough light for today, not enough light for the whole journey. Because God is more interested in who we are becoming than what we're accumulating. His priority is forming a people who would trust him not just once, but trust him every day of their lives. Now, we do read verse 8 about God providing quail in the evening. And I did want to mention, quail was not like the long-term solution to their food and their provision. It was the kindness in the moment, but the focus is going to be on manna. Manna's the lesson. They're going to bring this bread from heaven. They're going to get it 6 days a week for 40 years. God's going to sustain his people on manna because it's a thing that's going to keep them and teach them to be dependent on him. One of the things I don't want us to miss out is look at verse 7. Verse 7, it says, in the morning, hear this, you will see the glory of the Lord because he has heard your grumbling against him. And then Moses gives some instructions. And again, verse 10, it says, as soon as Aaron spoke, they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. What's remarkable is they haven't got any bread yet. God hasn't provided the bread, but God is making his presence known before he meets their physical need. Because let's clarify this. I want you to hear this. Daily bread is more about a relationship than it is about survival. Because provision flows from presence, not the other way around. God's like, hey, the focus is not just the bread. The focus is on me and the relationship, and I want you to see that. Because God doesn't want the people to think, oh, we're good because we were fed. No, he wants them to think, oh, we're good because God's with us, right? There's a difference here. I mean, again, I go to parenting, like when kids are scared when they're young, right? When kids are scared, parents, what's your first move? It's not to go and be like, I'm going to solve the problem. The first move, your kid is scared, you wrap them up, you hug them, you say, I'm with you, bud, I got you. I'm here, I love you. I'm reassuring you. Then together you go fix the problems because what the child needs is not a solution, they need your presence. Whatever it is, I'm with you. You're not alone. We got this. And this is why God shows up before he provides provision. He shows his glory to them. Because he's reframing daily bread. It's not just about survival and food, it's about relationship. Because God doesn't want to just be our emergency contact. He wants this daily relationship, this daily communion, this daily dependence on him. This is where it's going to get fun, though. Movement 3 for us this morning is when trust feels risky, control feels reasonable. That sounds about accurate. Manna shows up, and Moses gives some instructions. Hey, you need to gather an omer, which is like a 2-liter bottle of this dry bread. And he says, I don't want you to stockpile it. I just want you to take enough for the day. And verse 18, it says, each gathered as much as they could. Nobody's left out. Nobody went hungry. God's provision was sufficient for everybody. But, there are some of the people, like some of us here today, who couldn't help themselves. They took extra. They tried to secure tomorrow's today. They took more than they should have. And verse 20, it says, they did not listen to Moses, and some took more and left a part of it until the morning, and it bred worms and it stank. I love that. You take more, you try and hoard it. Can you imagine if they did that in COVID? Like all the toilet paper we had would just bred worms, and it'd be terrible. Like some of you all, man, you'd have a lot of worms in your house. I know it, right? See, God's provision wasn't the problem. It's that trust was hard. It felt risky. God, I know you provided bread for today, but are you really going to show up again tomorrow? And what we do is we think, well, God, let me just help you out, right? Let me just help you out. Let me grab more because, that way you don't have to show up tomorrow. And in case you don't, I got it taken care of, right? Let me clarify something here. Like planning is not wrong, right? Saving wisdom matters. But there's a difference between planning and trust and hoarding out of fear. Because what happens is sometimes our hoarding, sometimes our control is simply fear dressed up as wisdom. Oh, we can justify our control, we can justify our hoarding because it's just wisdom. When really the heart behind it is fear. It's the fact that we can't trust, we're not sure, and so we're going to do what we can. Which is why during COVID, we hoarded onto toilet paper. Now, toilet paper is absolutely a necessity. But I'm not sure God calls us to hoard it. I think this requires us to ask ourselves a difficult personal question. And I'm going to clarify, I'm not accusing anybody here. This is a question I want to ask myself. Where is our daily dependence? Are we daily depending on the Lord? Are we trusting in the Lord? Or are we trusting in our savings and our wise planning and our job and our family? What is it we are really trusting in? Because I think the summary for this passage, I think what the story is all about, the big idea is God is giving us daily bread to form a daily trust in Him. And not just to meet our daily physical needs. God's whole purpose in daily bread is not just to provide sustenance. God's purpose is to form a people who will depend on Him on a daily basis. And so, the story is asking us a simple question. The question for us is, will we trust God for today? I'm not talking about next year. I'm not talking about next month. I'm talking about you and I here today. Will we trust God to provide for our needs? Do we trust God to take care of us today as well as tomorrow? Which is why I think the Sermon on the Mount is significant. Again, Sermon on the Mount, some disciples come up to Jesus and they're like, hey, teach us how to pray. Remember how he prays? He says, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Remember this next line? Give us this day our daily bread. He comes back right here to Exodus 16, this daily bread. He's not teaching us to ignore tomorrow. But he's teaching us to choose trust and dependence on the Lord today, to let go of our desire for control for tomorrow, but to depend on him now. Now, when I was studying this week, I got to a point when I was like, all right, this is good, daily bread, I get it, right? It provided bread. That's how the Israelites survived in Exodus chapter 16. But what about those of us in 2026, right? I'm not sure any of us need bread to fall from heaven in order for us to have a meal tomorrow, right? I think most of us are doing okay. What does this mean for us today? And I'll tell you what, I think this idea of daily bread, daily dependence on the Lord is just as significant it is for us as it is for the people in Exodus 16. Well, maybe for us it's not about hunger, but what are the things that we rely on to feel safe, to feel secure, to feel stable, to feel okay? See, this daily dependence for us in 2026, it looks like us saying, God, I need strength to get through today, to get through the grief, to help me through the suffering. It's saying, God, I need to depend on you today for peace. Peace over my anxiety, peace over my fear of life feeling overwhelming, of me not knowing how things are going to work out. Daily dependence looks like us having security for all the what ifs that we run through our mind. I don't know how this is going to work out. So what does it look like for us to receive daily dependence, daily bread from the Lord today in 2026? 3 practical things for us this morning. If we're going to receive daily bread, number 1, it's going to be by us practicing daily dependence on God through prayer. Have you kind of noticed the last couple weeks, if you've been here, as we talk about being dependent, how tied dependence is to prayer? The reason we pray is because we realize there is something or someone greater than us. That when we realize our limitations, when we realize how insignificant we truly are and how great God is, and we hear about the fruit that he would accomplish that is beyond what we could ever imagine, prayer becomes the natural response. God, I'm not sure I've got it, but I know you do, right? See, 2026, I would love for this to be a year that we as a church, we just become a people that sit on this idea of praying. That we would start the day, every day, in the same way. God, I need you. I need you. Would you give me today what I need? My kids, man, they're driving me crazy, God. God, would you give me patience and grace and steadiness in those relationships? God, my work's a mess. God, would you give me wisdom and clarity? Would you lead me in that workplace? God, my anxiety is rampant. God, would you be my peace? Practicing daily dependence through prayer is so significant. Before we manage the schedules, before we check our balances, before we solve all the problems, prayer reminds us that we are dependent creatures living in a world that is upheld by a faithful God. We've got to start with prayer. Remember 2 Chronicles 16, we talked about this last week. 2 Chronicles 16, it says God is constantly looking for people who are dependent on him, for him to give his strong support to. God is constantly looking for people that are dependent for him to bless and to support and to help. That's why our prayer has got to be, give us this day our daily bread. Help us to be dependent on you. In fact, I wanted to give you a heads up. February 8th, this is 2 weeks from today. We've been talking about this series about being dependent in prayer. And I'm like, we got to stop talking about it. Let's put it into practice. So just a heads up, February 8th, we're going to do a prayer Sunday because I'm so convinced that prayer has got to be a greater priority for us in the church. We're going to gather on a Sunday morning, and you're going to hear me talk for about 3 minutes, and then we're going to just pray together. Is it going to be awkward? Probably. Do I have some anxiety with it? Yeah, much easier. Just give me a sermon. Let me teach through it. But I believe that prayer is so significant that we have to be willing to just put it out there and make it happen. Number one, we've got to practice daily dependence through prayer. Number two, we've got to live open-handed with what we have. Again, because I think the difference between us and Exodus 16, man, those people, they didn't have much. They were dependent on the Lord every day. The question we have to ask is, how much is enough? How much is enough? Because I don't think there's many of us that we don't know what we're going to eat tomorrow. We don't know how it's going to provide. And so the wisdom that tells us to save and to plan and to prepare, like that's not wrong. But probably here's the challenge that many of us in 2026 face, is how easy it is for us to trust our abundance and our plan and our savings and our wisdom instead of trusting in the Lord. Right? Many of us, we have enough. And honestly, it's hard for us to determine, are we trusting in the Lord or are we trusting in our stuff? And I'm convinced of this. I'm convinced that the test about who we're trusting is whether we will live with an open-handed heart. Because what happens is when we live with closed hands, when we refuse to live sacrificially, it reveals where our heart is trusting. My time, my resources, my plan, my money. But when we're open-handed, it's God, I trust. You've given this to me and you can provide for me again. The diagnostic question I want to ask you this morning is, does generosity come naturally to you? Or does it feel threatening? When God invites you to give your money or your time or your energy, does that feel like participation to you or a loss to you? Because open-handed living says, God has given me enough for today, and I trust that God can provide again for tomorrow, and again for next year, and again for retirement, and all those other things. Close-handed says, well, I just need to hold on to this because I've got it, just in case, right? Let me ask, how open-handed are you with the resources that God has given you? Are you generous? Are you faithful in giving to the Lord? What about your time? Are you serving others? Are you actually investing in somebody who probably has little return to you, simply because God calls us to love as He loved? See, my encouragement for us as we practice daily dependence is to hold what we have with open hands. Because as we open hands, it's going to require us to depend on the Lord, to trust Him, and to build that daily dependence. Number 3, we're going to touch this real quick. Number 3 for us this morning is to practice weekly dependence by choosing to observe a Sabbath rest. I kind of breezed through this chapter. We didn't really touch on this, but one of the instructions that Moses gives the Israelites in Exodus 16 is 1 day a week, you're to gather twice as much food. Because then on the Sabbath day, you don't go and collect more food. God doesn't provide manna on the Sabbath. The Sabbath was a day to practice this idea of trusting God to provide, to rest, to breathe, to trust. So Sabbath is such a beautiful thing. It is also incredibly challenging. And I want us to recognize that Sabbath is a gift from God that He has given to us. It's a day for us to say, God, we trust you. God, you're in control, not me. Sabbath is not something you have to earn. It is literally a gift from God to be received. So I don't know what it looks like for you. Maybe it's a full day, or maybe if you're like, I can only carve out a couple hours. But man, find a practical way to practice Sabbath rest, to trust in the Lord. Daily bread in 2026 is not necessarily to keep us alive, but what it will do is it will keep us dependent on God. That for today, that God would give us strength for our responsibilities. He'd give us patience in our relationships, wisdom in our decisions, and peace when life feels uncertain. Because God doesn't promise to remove every fear or answer every question, but he does promise to remain faithful and present one day at a time. So let's stop stockpiling and trying to control outcomes. And let's trust God to provide what we need when we need it.